Hey guys, tonight we're heading back to the muddy, incense-scented world of medieval hospitals places where cats roam the corridors freely, monks double as pharmacists, and your best hope of survival might just be prayer or dumb luck. Picture it: narrow cobbled streets glistening with rain, the scent of wood smoke, and wet hay hanging thick in the air. You're hunched in a coarse wool cloak, trudging past shuttered stalls and suspiciously cheerful beggars. Ahead, a worn wooden sign creaks above two arched doors: the hospital. You approach slowly. There's no ambulance, no glass entrance with automatic doors, just the faint sound of bells and the meow of a cat perched on a crumbling wall. This is your first glimpse of a medieval care facility. It's more monastery than medical center, but hey, you're not exactly spoiled for choice. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're tuning in from somewhere far away, or just your couch, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The gates creak open. Inside, the hospital seems to breathe a strange blend of hushed chanting, clattering pots, and human sniffles. You're not entirely sure who's in charge here, but a figure in a long brown robe gestures you inside with a sleepy nod. He smells faintly of cloves, candle wax, and possibly goat. You step into the entry courtyard, careful not to slip on the uneven stones. It's not much to look at: a few timber-framed walls with leaded glass windows, a stone trough filled with tepid water, and an impressive collection of stray chickens. They seem oddly comfortable here, pecking around the feet of other visitors, some coughing, some praying, all waiting. Above the main door, a small painted fresco depicts the Virgin Mary gently cradling a very unwell-looking peasant. It's comforting in an at least she's paying attention kind of way. You shuffle closer, wiping rain from your forehead, and try not to make eye contact with a man cradling a broken leg wrapped in moss and twine. He nods at you anyway, as if to say, "Yep, welcome to the club." Inside, the smell hits you first: herbs, mildew, incense, and that peculiar sour scent of boiled linen. There's a brazier in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the damp, and a long bench where the infirm and unlucky sit hunched like question marks. A nun approaches. Her face is stern but kind, framed by a stiff white coif. She holds a bowl of warm barley water and a cloth that may once have been white. You're offered both. The water tastes like sadness, but you pretend to be grateful. It's all part of the process. Admission isn't quite as simple as filling out a form. A robed monk appears, holding a small wooden tablet and a quill feather that's seen better days. He doesn't ask for your name first, he asks about your sins. Apparently, health and holiness go hand in hand here. "Have you confessed recently?" he murmurs. You blink. "To who?" "To God," he replies, as if you should have known. "Before we can tend your body, we must see to your soul." And so begins a mildly awkward exchange in which you admit to stealing a chicken, lying about your neighbor's turnips, and possibly taking the Lord's name in vain when you stubbed your toe last Thursday. The monk nods solemnly, as if this is standard fare. He writes something on the tablet that you suspect reads, "Needs work." You're shown to a narrow wooden frame with a straw mattress that crunches like autumn leaves. A wool blanket is folded neatly at the end, surprisingly clean. Someone's tried to make it cozy, though the overall ambiance is barn chic. There's a window high up on the wall, letting in gray light and a chilly draft. A candle flickers beside your bed, set in a niche carved from stone. It's not luxurious. It's not even sanitary by modern standards, but it's safe, it's dry, and someone seems to care whether you live or die. Even if their definition of care involves applying crushed snails to your wounds and making you pray 5 times a day. Still, as you sink into the straw and try not to think about fleas, you realize something remarkable. You've arrived. You're officially a patient in a medieval hospital. You've crossed the threshold into a place where medicine, magic, and mystery blur into one long, feverish dream. You won't find antibiotics here. You will find people who believe that illness has a moral cause, that healing is a divine gift, and that goose grease fixes just about anything. Historians still argue whether these hospitals were primarily medical institutions or just very pious guest houses with good intentions. The line is fuzzy. But for now, your head is resting. The candle glows gently, and a distant bell tolls the hour. The journey has only begun. You awaken to the sound of flapping linen and someone enthusiastically coughing 2 beds over. Morning has broken in the hospital courtyard, and with it comes a flurry of slow, purposeful activity. You sit up on your crunchy straw mattress and peer out through the narrow doorway that leads to the inner yard. It's more bustling than you'd expect for a place of rest. Chickens strut about like they own the place, and someone's underpants are flapping dramatically on a line stretched between 2 fig trees. The hospital courtyard is a peculiar blend of monastic calm and noisy barnyard. A nun is pouring something vaguely green from one pot to another with the focus of an alchemist. A barefoot boy chases a goat that has most definitely escaped from somewhere it shouldn't have. A patient in a tattered shift is muttering what sounds like a recipe for eel pie while shelling peas. And always there's that smell, a kind of warm, wet cabbage bouquet with top notes of smoked tallow and something medicinal. You try not to inhale too deeply. This courtyard isn't just decoration, it's the heart of the hospital. Think of it as an open-air common room kitchen and herb lab all rolled into one. There's a well in the middle, its pulley squeaking slightly as someone hauls up a bucket of water that's probably cold enough to shock a ghost. Near the edges, raised wooden walkways protect dry feet from the ever-present mud. Though someone forgot to tell the geese who are waddling purposefully across both. A monk strides by, carrying a basket of what look like turnips and possibly a small loaf of bread that's seen better centuries. He doesn't speak, just nods at you solemnly, as if to say, yes, this is normal. You spot a row of outdoor privies, basically wooden cubicles over a pit, and note that one door has been suspiciously nailed shut. You make a mental note not to ask why. The courtyard also houses the hospital's makeshift kitchen. A long stone counter runs along one wall, stained with herbs, wax, and hope. Over a low fire, 2 iron pots bubble ominously. One smells like lentils, the other, Well, let's just say you hope you're not having that for lunch. A woman with sleeves rolled to her elbows stirs one pot lazily while berating a novice about the correct way to skin a rabbit. Meanwhile, an elderly man with a bandaged head is attempting to teach a group of very bored-looking young patients how to play dice using pebbles and what may or may not be a sheep knuckle. They're terrible at it. You find yourself oddly comforted by the normalcy of it all. The hospital, you're beginning to realize, isn't just a place for the sick. It's a living, breathing ecosystem. There are chickens, herbs, novices, nuns, patients, monks, even the occasional visiting noble who donated a new spoon and now wants to watch the poor people get better. The building itself shows signs of many patchwork renovations. A newer roof over the kitchen, weathered stone that doesn't match the original structure, stained glass in one window and plain horn in the next. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitals were intended to grow into these sprawling, self-sufficient spaces, or whether it just sort of happened over time like moss on a damp log. What's clear is that everything has a place, even if that place seems like it was decided by someone who enjoys mild chaos. You pass a tiny chapel wedged between the laundry lines and the garden. Its doorway is barely 4 feet high, and inside, a candle flickers beside a wooden crucifix that's seen a few too many rainstorms. A single lily droops in a jar of murky water. Someone has scratched a crude smiley face into the pew. Just beyond that, the hospital's garden grows in haphazard rows. Lavender and rosemary stand proud, while nasturtiums creep like they own the place. Marigolds peek out from under a collapsed trellis, and a surprisingly organized patch of leeks grows near the wall. You can smell chamomile as you pass, probably planted to calm the humors, though it mainly seems to attract bees. A nun with an apron full of wilted herbs shuffles past you, muttering to herself about someone forgetting the goose foot again. She doesn't explain what that is. In one corner of the courtyard stands a small lean-to made of mismatched timber. A crude sign above it reads, "For troublesome spirits." Whether it refers to mischievous patients or actual ghosts is unclear, and frankly, you're not sure which answer you'd prefer. The strange thing is, this mess, this clucking, coughing, steamy, slightly chaotic mess, is what care looks like in the Middle Ages. You might not get privacy or a clean blanket more than once a month, but you'll get broth, you'll get prayer, you'll get someone who knows the difference between mugwort and foxglove, hopefully. And occasionally, if the stars align and the right nun is on duty, you might even get a warm compress that doesn't smell like fish. You glance back toward the ward and notice your cot being fluffed by a novice who appears to be arguing with a duck. No one intervenes. You decide to let them work it out. So you linger in the courtyard a little longer, inhaling the earthy scent of herbs and boiled linen, watching as patients limp through the sunlight and cats sun themselves on low stone walls. This place may not be a palace, but it works, sort of. You're not healed yet, but something in you feels ever so slightly soothed. After a while, a novice with flushed cheeks and an impressive collection of ink smudges on her sleeves beckons you from the courtyard. It's time, she says, with the solemn gravity of someone announcing your fate. You're not entirely sure what that means, but you follow anyway, because when in medieval Rome, you're ushered through a side corridor, the air thick with damp stone and the faint hint of mint. The walls are lined with faded frescoes, their saints and angels barely clinging to visibility as if they too have had a rough night. The floors are uneven, some parts slick with rainwater that's dripped through the roof tiles. You nearly trip on a loose cobble, catching yourself against a wooden beam with a low groan. The novice doesn't notice, she's too busy humming something tuneless. Eventually, you're led to what might generously be called an admissions chamber, though it feels more like a glorified coat closet. A monk sits at a wooden desk, surrounded by parchment rolls and a skull that may or may not be decorative. He doesn't look up. Name he asks without preamble. You hesitate. Thomas. Last confession, he mumbles, dipping his quill into a pot of ink the consistency of stew. Yesterday, I think. Maybe. He nods, unimpressed. Illness, stomach cramps, fever, occasional visions of a goat telling me secrets. The monk pauses. Goat, you say. A pause. Common this time of year. He scribbles something onto a wax tablet which you assume now reads something like delirium possible, demonic influence, give extra broth. He gestures to a shelf behind him, filled with crude wooden tokens, each marked with a crude pictogram, a spoon, a cross, a crescent moon, and one that looks suspiciously like a turnip. You're handed the turnip. This is your token, he says. Don't lose it. This assigns you to the green ward. They're calmer there. Mostly boils and blisters, no screamers. You nod as if that's the most natural thing in the world. Historians still argue whether these tokens were literal tracking systems or more symbolic groupings meant to guide patient flow, especially when no one could really read. Either way, it's oddly effective. You now belong to the green ward, and the turnip icon is your identity before you're allowed entry. However, there's one more hurdle, the purification. You're led to a narrow alcove where a nun waits with a bowl of water, a scrap of linen, and a look of resigned determination. Without a word, she begins to wash your hands and feet. The water is ice cold. The linen feels like sandpaper. She mutters a prayer under her breath as she works something about Saint Roche and the banishment of pestilence. You wonder if this is meant to spiritually cleanse you, or if she's just really committed to hygiene. Once dried, well less wet is probably more accurate. You're handed a tunic that smells faintly of rosemary and smoke. It's one size fits none, but you slip it on anyway, replacing your travel-stained clothes. Your old garments are placed into a sack labeled for boiling, which sounds promising and vaguely ominous. At last, you're led into the green ward. The room is long, high-ceilinged and dim, with narrow windows that let in shafts of gray light. Wooden beams arch overhead like the ribs of a great ship. Rows of cots line the walls, each separated by a thin curtain or a hopeful bit of rope strung with drying herbs. The smell here is complex, part lavender, part boiled onions, part something that might once have been cheese. Patients lie wrapped in wool, their cheeks flushed or pale, depending on the nature of their afflictions. Some are dozing, others whisper prayers. One man is snoring with such enthusiasm that a nearby candle flickers in protest. You're directed to a cot near the back, not far from a fireplace, where someone has thoughtfully placed a few potatoes to roast. You sit down slowly, letting the mattress crunch beneath you again. It's slightly warmer here, the draft less insistent. You take comfort in the soft murmur of conversation, the occasional clink of a spoon in a bowl, and the rhythm of a place that is surprisingly peaceful. Soon, a nun appears bearing a bowl of broth. It's thin, cloudy, and smells of leek and something vaguely nutty. She offers it with a quiet smile and a murmured, "Eat what you can. You'll feel better with food. You're not sure if it's medicine or merely soup, but you sip anyway. It's not bad. It's not good either, but it's warm." Around you, care takes many forms. One patient is having his feet gently wrapped in warm cloths soaked in wine. Another is receiving a whispered litany of saints from a monk whose voice is barely audible. A third has simply been tucked in tightly and left to nap while a cat curls up at the foot of his bed. You envy him instantly. There's no rush here, no machines beeping, no fluorescent lights, just human-time monastic patience and the occasional raspy hymn echoing from the chapel down the hall. Of course, not all wards are this peaceful. You hear rumors whispered between beds, the red ward where fever burns bright, the black ward where the coughing never stops. But for now, you're in the green. Green like herbs, green like hope, green like the moss growing on that one ceiling beam you keep staring at because you don't want to make eye contact with the guy missing 2 teeth. You lie back slowly, clutching your turnip token like a badge of survival. You've been admitted. You've been cleansed. You've been breathed. Now, the real healing begins. It doesn't take long before the spiritual side of things makes itself known. You wake in the early morning, still dark outside, with a thin frost collecting at the corners of the high windows to the sound of chanting. Soft and slow, carried through the corridors like a breeze, it rolls in waves from the chapel. You sit up clutching your blanket and listen. It's Latin, probably. Could be an exceptionally slow bird. But no, that's definitely a monk calling out the first prayer of the day. Soon, a novice appears, carrying a stub of candle and a jug of something hot that smells suspiciously like broth and regret. "Time for matins," she says, not unkindly. You're handed a cup, and the warmth spreads through your fingers like a promise. Medieval hospitals, you quickly realize, are about far more than fixing bones and settling stomachs. They're deeply religious institutions rooted in the belief that the body cannot be healed without tending the soul. This isn't just health care. It's penance, pilgrimage, and purgatory, all wrapped in one wool blanket. You're escorted to a small chapel tucked between the ward and the outer wall. Inside, flickering candles throw shadows across painted saints. Wooden pews creak under the weight of half-snoozing patients. A monk drones from a book so large it could double as a shield. You sit near the back, watching the flames dance, half listening, half dozing. The service is slow, rhythmic, and more about presence than comprehension. You're not entirely sure whether this is supposed to be healing or humbling. Probably both. You mumble an amen and shuffle out with the others, feet cold against the stone floor. Later that day, another monk stops by your bedside. He smells of beeswax and slightly burnt rosemary. "Have you made peace with your illness?" he asks gently. You blink. "I was hoping to just recover." He chuckles. "Healing begins when the soul accepts suffering." You're starting to suspect this place doesn't have a refund policy. Throughout the day, prayer continues like a heartbeat. There's a bell that rings for the Angelus, one for noon prayer, another for evening vespers. Sometimes a chant floats into the ward like incense, making everything feel slightly enchanted, or maybe just very, very sleepy. You notice patients aren't just being treated, they're being guided. There are confessions whispered from bed to bedside, psalms recited in shaky voices, crucifixes clutched like talismans. A nun spends 10 minutes carefully pinning a small relic to a woman's blanket, a strip of cloth said to have touched the bones of Saint Sebastian. For your protection, she murmurs, before vanishing back into the ward's folds like a wool-clad ghost. Historians still argue whether these spiritual practices were meant to psychologically comfort the ill or if people genuinely expected miracles. Maybe it's both. You're not exactly in the mood to challenge divine intervention right now, especially after last night's turnip broth. Some patients are here not because they're physically sick, but because their minds have frayed around the edges. One man insists he's being chased by invisible crows. Another refuses to sleep unless someone recites the entire genealogy of the Virgin Mary. You learn quickly that religious ritual is often the only treatment available for those ailments, along with gentle singing herbs, and sometimes just a firm "you'll feel better after matins." In a quiet moment, you find yourself staring at a painting of the crucifixion in the hallway. It's old flaked paint, a little lopsided, but something in it speaks to your current state pain patience and someone watching from above who hopefully knows what they're doing. A nun kneels beside you and whispers, "He suffered too." You nod. It's oddly comforting. Not the kind of comfort you'd get from a warm bath or soft mattress, but the medieval kind. The kind that tells you your pain is part of a larger plan, even if no one can quite explain what that plan is. By late afternoon, a monk arrives with a wooden box of thin sheets of parchment and a quill. "Would you like to write your sins?" he asks. Sometimes it eases the fever. You do your best, though. Your handwriting looks like you're being attacked by a goose. Still, it feels good, therapeutic. You end your list with, "Also, I once stole a pie and handed it back." God already knows, the monk says kindly, but it helps that you do too. You're beginning to suspect spiritual healing is as much about talking as it is about praying. People are seen, heard, witnessed. You notice the way the nuns touch the sick with reverence, how they whisper prayers, even when changing bandages or spooning broth. The divine is folded into every mundane act. That night, as the candles are dimmed and the ward quiets, you hear someone whispering a psalm beside their bed. Not loudly, not performatively, just because. You don't even know the words, but you murmur along. You feel a little better, not cured, but closer to something like peace. When the nuns finally decide you're lucid enough to be mobile without walking into a fireplace, they gently usher you into the heart of the hospital, the main ward. Not the courtyard or the entry corridor, but the actual sleeping and healing part. And you learn quickly, this isn't just a place for rest. It's a theater of human weirdness, courage, confusion, and strangely, comedy. The ward is a long hall, high-ceilinged and timber-beamed with tiny windows squeezed between buttresses like afterthoughts. The air smells of rosemary candle wax and whatever was served for dinner. Last night, probably barley stew with the enthusiastic addition of miscellaneous root. Rows of cots line both sides of the hall. their straw mattresses neatly fluffed, their scratchy wool blankets folded with monastic precision. There are no privacy curtains. If someone snores, confesses, hallucinates, or passes gas after a particularly experimental tonic, you're all going to experience it together. You're led to your cot, which has been swept clean of last night's crumbs and boasts a small pillow stuffed with something you sincerely hope isn't hay. A candle flickers in the alcove above your head, casting shadows that make even the gentlest saint statue look mildly threatening. Across from you, a man with a bandaged arm waves cheerfully. "They gave me wine this morning," he says with pride, as if that explains everything. He's missing 2 teeth but makes up for it with enthusiasm. It's for the pain. Or maybe because I prayed extra. Hard to tell. As you settle in, you realize the ward is its own little society. There's the woman who whispers every sentence twice for divine echo. There's the man who recites ballads in his sleep, some of them surprisingly catchy. And, at the far end of the room, lies someone nicknamed the Snorer. You'll understand why come nightfall. Then there's the constant stream of caregivers, nuns moving, like quiet ghosts, monks with clipped Latin prayers, novices clutching pots of mystery stew. They glide between beds, adjusting blankets, muttering blessings, replacing poultices. One spills something that smells alarmingly like hot vinegar, but no one flinches. A pair of cats patrol the ward. You've seen them in the courtyard, but here they take their jobs more seriously. Sniffing feet, curling up on pillows, occasionally chasing each other beneath the cots. "They keep away the rats," someone whispers. You nod, though you suspect they also just like the warm spots. Your bed neighbor, an elderly woman with a walking stick shaped like a swan, is humming a hymn while knitting a scarf that may also be a sling. "Been here 2 weeks," she tells you. "Came in for a sprain, stayed for the pears." You laugh, which hurts slightly. Pears. They give them when someone dies, she explains cheerfully. 1 per patient, helps with morale. Hospitals in the Middle Ages weren't just for the dying. In fact, many were more like extended stay lodges for the moderately sick, the elderly, the injured, or the unlucky. They were places of care, but also of community, and often your only real shot at not dying alone in a ditch. As the day unfolds, you begin to see the rhythm of the place. There's morning prayer, of course, followed by rounds during which a nun touches your forehead, sniffs your breath, yes, really, and declares that your spleen vapors are improved. Then comes a round of treatments, warm compresses, a spoonful of herbal tincture, and something that tastes like soggy gingerbread laced with mint and possible regret. Later, you're offered a walk which consists of being escorted arm in arm to the garden and back. It's less about exercise and more about checking you're not hallucinating snakes, which is fair because someone down the hall insists they saw one crawling out of the broth kettle. In between visits from caregivers, patients entertain themselves as best they can. Dice games, whispered stories, collective complaining. A novice reads aloud from a manuscript, something about saints and bees, and everyone nods solemnly, except one man who keeps insisting bees are witches in disguise. No one corrects him. At one point, a loud crash signals that someone has dropped the chamber pot bucket. A collective groan ripples through the ward, followed by a prayer, and then, reluctantly, a mop. You begin to realize that Despite the discomfort, the drafts, and the questionable ointments, there's something oddly reassuring about this place. It runs on routine, yes, but also on shared experience. The suffering is communal. The care is constant. The air might be cold, but someone will always tuck your blanket in. Historians still debate whether medieval hospitals were effective by any metric we'd use today. Certainly they lacked what we'd call modern medical standards, but what they did have, caregivers who showed up, beds that didn't move, food, warmth, prayer, and perhaps most importantly, time was enough to keep many patients alive. Maybe not cured, but alive. As dusk settles and the shadows lengthen, the ward quiets. Candles are lit. A nun reads softly from the Psalms. You catch the scent of lavender in the air. Somewhere, a patient begins humming. Another snores. A third mutters something about a pigeon with glowing eyes. You lie back on your pillow, pull the blanket to your chin, and close your eyes. In this place of shared strangeness, you feel oddly safe, maybe even lucky. After all, you could have been sent to the Red Ward. The next morning begins, as always, with bells. Not a soft, dreamy chime, but a full-bodied clang that bounces off the stone walls and drills straight into your half-conscious brain. You groan, sit up slowly, and immediately regret it as your spine pops like a bundle of dry twigs. A nearby patient stretches and mutters something about St. Lawrence's toes. No one questions it. The routine here is unshakable, so predictable you could set your internal sundial by it. The first bell is for prayers. The second for broth. The third is a bit of a mystery, but everyone reacts like it's urgent. You shuffle toward the garden side of the ward to join the others lining up for the morning blessing/bodily assessment. A nun touches your forehead again. Apparently, this is a favorite diagnostic tool, and nods approvingly. Less warm, still pale. Good, more leaks for you. She moves on before you can argue. Daily life in a medieval hospital revolves around a comforting and sometimes exasperating schedule. Meals, prayers, examinations, more meals, more prayers, and the occasional visit from someone important looking for a tax write-off. If you're lucky, the lord of the local manor might drop by to donate a sack of lentils and receive the full pious benefactor experience hand-kissing flattery and a prayer muttered at double speed. You're handed your breakfast, a bowl of thin gruel with a generous topping of what you hope are raisins, and guided back to your cot. Across from you, your neighbor is already halfway through hers, noisily slurping. This is the good day, she says, between spoonfuls. Yesterday was garlic mash again, for the humors. Ah, the humors. If you hadn't heard the word a dozen times already, you might think it meant jokes. But here it's deadly serious. Everything revolves around keeping your four humors, blood phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, in balance. Feeling anxious. Too much black bile. Sneezing. Clearly a phlegm imbalance. Stubbed toe. Definitely blood. The medieval approach to health is part observation, part guesswork, and part deeply committed storytelling. They don't just treat symptoms, they narrate them. You're not just coughing. You're suffering from an imbalance of warm and moist brought on by melancholy and moonlight. It's almost poetic, if it weren't also the reason they're feeding someone mugwort and goat's milk. A typical day includes several rounds of balancing activities. A nun brings you a foot bath filled with warm water, lavender, and something squishy you choose not to investigate. While your toes soak, she recites a litany of minor saints known for healing. You pretend to listen, but mostly enjoy the heat creeping into your ankles. Next comes movement, which is encouraged if not strictly enforced. You're gently nudged out of bed and asked to walk the length of the ward 3 times once for each member of the Trinity. A novice counts aloud while trying not to trip over a dozing cat. After your walk, you're treated to what they call reinvigoration therapy, which turns out to be a cup of watered-down wine and a story from a monk about the time he accidentally tried to bless a goat instead of a pilgrim. You're not sure if the story is true, but it helps pass the time, and honestly, the goat came out of it with a better attitude. Then lunch. It's a communal affair. Patients sit upright if they can. Those who can't are fed by staff. The meal is usually a thin stew or pottage root vegetables, pulses a suspiciously chewy bit of meat, and flatbread, hard enough to double as armor. Dessert. An apple slice and a short lecture about gluttony. You nibble dutifully. Throughout the day, someone is always sweeping, boiling, mending, muttering, or praying. The hospital runs like a creaky, holy clock powered by candle wax, chicken grease, and deeply ingrained habit. There's no sense of urgency here, no rush. Healing is something that unfolds slowly like a scroll over days and weeks, or it doesn't. Either way, no one panics. Of course, not everything runs perfectly. A monk accidentally mixes up the day's herb schedule and feeds someone nightshade instead of nettle. The patient falls asleep for 12 hours and wakes up with excellent skin. A nun misplaces the cod liver oil and uses honey instead, which somehow cures a patient's leg ulcers and leaves her popular with bees. You start to notice subtle hierarchies. The long-term patients get the comfiest cots and the fluffiest pillows. One man even has a rug. The more pious ones receive extra blessings. The loudest ones get mild sedatives in the form of blessed poppy wine, which you strongly suspect is just fermented plums with a kick. Historians still argue whether these schedules were medically motivated or just an elaborate way to prevent boredom-fueled chaos. Either way they work, you feel calmer. Your body's still a bit of a disaster, sure, but your mind is softer, quieter, held. By early evening, the ward is bathed in candlelight and the scent of warm herbs. The snoring begins in waves like ocean tides. You lie back, wrapped in wool, full of leek mash and vague hope. The day has ended as it began, with bells, prayers, and the quiet hum of shared survival. And, somewhere in the distance, a cat meows with perfect dramatic timing. By your 3rd or 4th day, you've started recognizing the faces behind the care. Those silent figures moving through the wards with trays, bowls, candles, and occasionally what looks like a taxidermied badger used in some form of treatment no one is willing to explain. These are your caregivers, and they are, in every sense of the word, characters. Let's start with Brother Thomas. You can hear him coming before you see him. His sandals slap the flagstones in a flat rhythm, and he always hums under his breath, something that might be Gregorian chant or might be a medieval drinking song. He's the hospital's designated attending monk, which means he's equal parts nurse counselor and occasional pillow fluffer. "Good morning," he says, today peering into your eyes like he's reading the Psalms there, still dreaming of the goat. You nod somewhat sheepishly. He laughs. Well, the humors are stubborn things. Tomas is cheerful, chatty, and has an almost reckless confidence in warm wine as a cure for everything from broken ribs to heartbreak. He tells you once while applying mustard seed paste to your ankle that he once tried to raise bees in his bedchamber. Didn't go well, he says with a shrug, but I learned a lot. Then there's Sister Agnes. She's the head of the infirmary nuns' tall, always composed and capable of silencing a ward with one eyebrow. You see her once pouring a scalding herbal mixture into a cracked clay basin and reciting 3 different prayers in Latin without taking a breath. She never raises her voice yet. Even the most delirious patients sit up straighter when she walks by. Sister Agnes believes in strict order in St. Hildegard's writings and in your personal responsibility to hold in your cough until after morning prayer. She doesn't smile often, but once you hear her laugh at a patient's terrible joke about a sick donkey and a confused bishop, it's like witnessing a miracle. Agnes and Thomas are 2 ends of the spectrum order and chaos structure and improvisation. Between them is a whole cast of characters. There's young Aelred, a novice monk so eager to please that he once boiled everyone's slippers by mistake, thinking it was part of the cleaning process. There's Dame Cecily, a laywoman who arrives on Sundays to bandage wounds and deliver psalms with the volume of a battle trumpet. And there's the barber surgeon. Ah, yes, the barber surgeon. His name is Hugo, and he walks with the strut of someone who has both sharpened a blade and cut someone's hair with it on the same afternoon. He wears a leather apron, a wide hat, and the perpetual expression of a man who is equal parts exhausted and thrilled by his own importance. Hugo is not technically a doctor because medieval hospitals don't have those, at least not in the way you're used to. But he does perform surgeries, pull teeth, lance abscesses, and once you swear, tried to reset a man's broken nose using a spoon and firm encouragement. "You look better," he says cheerily. "One morning, poking at your wrist, you'll be ready for bloodletting soon." You stare. "Wait, what?" "Standard precaution," he says. "Get the bad blood out before it tries anything." This, it turns out, is a popular sentiment among hospital staff. Most illnesses, you're told, come from an imbalance of humors, and bloodletting is the equivalent of turning the system off and back on again. It doesn't help that Hugo seems to enjoy it a bit too much. But not all care is so dramatic. The majority of your treatment is handled by the nuns, many of whom are astonishingly well-versed in herbs, poultices, and subtle diagnostics. One nun hums as she examines your tongue and declares you in need of more bitter greens. Another adjusts your pillow and quietly tucks a dried lavender sachet beneath it for better dreams, she says with a wink. And then there's the unofficial staff, the patients who've been here so long they've become part of the furniture. The old man with a permanent seat near the fire. He's been healing from gout since the last king's coronation. The woman with the parrot, she just never left, and no one has the heart to tell her to go. You overhear snippets of their advice whispered to new arrivals. Always ask for the red bowl. The blue one leaks. Don't eat the stew on Wednesdays. That's liver day. If the night nurse hums, you're going to have weird dreams. The effect is cumulative. These people, robed, roving, chanting, chiding, become your lifeline. They bathe you when you're too weak to move, tell you ghost stories when the coughing keeps you up, and argue gently about which saint is best at curing headaches. Spoiler, it's Saint Denis who carried his own head, which earns him points for dedication. Historians still argue whether these caregivers were more practical or spiritual in their purpose. Many orders were founded on the belief that serving the sick was a holy act, a way to walk beside Christ. But they were also surprisingly organized, keeping track of patients, rationing supplies, maintaining schedules. The chaos had method, even if that method included curing fevers with leeches and peppermint tea. You lie back in your cot, warmed by the fire and full of questionable broth. Brother Tomas has just finished telling a joke about a sick monk and a confused pig. Sister Agnes rolls her eyes but says nothing. Somewhere a novice drops a tray. No one even looks up. This place, you realize, runs on quiet devotion and slightly alarming levels of improvisation. And somehow it works. A few days later, your peaceful, if musty, existence is interrupted by the arrival of the barber surgeon. Again. He appears just after morning prayer, dramatically sweeping back the curtain around your cot like a man about to announce a royal decree. Today, Hugo says we inspect the wound. You don't recall mentioning a wound, he insists anyway. Before you can object, he produces a wooden box with a dramatic thump, opens it like a treasure chest, and reveals a collection of tools that look suspiciously like they were borrowed from a blacksmith. Hooks, clamps, knives with worn ivory handles, tools that suggest that medieval surgery is less precise incisions and more just hold still and think holy thoughts. You're not even bleeding, but Hugo insists this is merely preventative exploration. You begin to pray. Surgery in the medieval hospital isn't its own department. It's part of daily care. If a patient has a visible problem, a broken bone, a boil and abscess, or in one alarming case, you hear about a demon behind the left eye, the barber surgeon is summoned. The operating space is not a separate room, but often just a cleared area in the ward lit with a few extra candles and perhaps screened off with a helpful curtain. You're taken to a small alcove near the herb room, a space that smells comfortingly of thyme and terrifyingly of burnt linen. There's a wooden bench, a pile of clean-ish cloths, and a candle already melting with dramatic urgency. Hugo hums as he sharpens a blade on a piece of leather tied to his belt. "We'll do a quick inspection," he says cheerfully, "just in case you've grown a second spleen." "Has that happened before, you whisper?" He pauses. "Once, but it turned out to be an onion." "You sit." He pokes, prods, taps a spot near your ribs. He mutters. "Tender but not tragic. That seems to be the best-case scenario." Surgical procedures in medieval hospitals ranged from tooth extractions to cauterizations to something ominously called trepanation, which involved drilling into the skull to relieve pressure. You sincerely hope Hugo doesn't get any ideas today. The tools are cleaned in a mixture of vinegar, boiling water, and, what you're fairly certain, is wine. There's no anesthesia, but if the procedure's complex enough, they might give the patient a cloth soaked in poppy essence or fermented ale. Pain management in this world is more about distraction, prayer, and occasionally biting down on a stick. You're spared the knife. This time, your supposed wound is declared a phantom swelling, probably from poor posture or humor agitation. Hugo slaps your shoulder and advises fresh air and fewer hallucinated goats. Then he's off to see another patient, one who reportedly sneezed so hard he dislocated something. As you shuffle back to your cot, a novice leans in and whispers, "He once stitched a chicken, said it was for practice." You're not surprised. Despite the terrifying optics, the barber surgeons had their uses. They performed bloodletting amputations, bone setting, even bladder stone removal. Were they trained? Sort of. Most learned through apprenticeships or by trial and error, emphasis on error. But in a world with no antibiotics and limited understanding of infection, even clumsy interventions could save lives. Later that afternoon, you witness a minor surgery from the safety of your bed. A patient with a swollen finger is laid on a bench. Hugo carefully slices open the skin. An assistant immediately dabs the area with wine-soaked linen. The patient grits his teeth, mutters about St. Cuthbert, and squeezes a wooden rosary until it creaks. The procedure lasts 5 minutes, the cleanup 10, the storytelling about it 2 hours. Everyone who walks by afterward gets a different version of the tale. He fought a dog. It was an enchanted splinter. The abscess sang before it burst. Medieval patients, you discover, enjoy embellishing almost as much as healing. Of course, the success rate of surgery back then was mixed. Infections were common. So was bleeding out. Recovery often relied more on luck and prayer than on the quality of the incision. But if you made it through, you were treated like a minor miracle, sometimes even upgraded to extra stew. Historians still debate whether medieval surgery helped more than it harmed. Was it crude? Absolutely. But it was also in its own strange way compassionate. These practitioners, be they monks, nuns, or amateur saw-wielders, truly wanted people to live, even if their understanding of anatomy was slightly optimistic. That night, Hugo strolls past your bed again. He's humming and wiping something off his apron. "You're next on my list for bloodletting," he says, entirely too cheerfully. You clutch your blanket and stare into the candlelight. Maybe if you pray hard enough, Saint Sebastian will send a distraction, like a small earthquake or a goat. Meanwhile, the ward has settled into its usual rhythm: coughs, snores, whispered prayers, and the ever-present smell of sage and slightly burnt turnips. You're alive. You're resting. And you didn't lose a limb today. So you chalk it up as a win. You've made it through another day with all your limbs intact. So naturally, they decide it's time to update your medicine. And by medicine, they mean a loosely supervised tour of the hospital's answer to a pharmacy, a space that feels equal parts greenhouse wizard's closet and experimental kitchen. The apothecary's room is tucked behind the chapel, its doorway marked with a painted herb sprig and a quote from St. Hildegard that loosely translates to all creation has healing power, except maybe nettles. You duck under the low lintel and are instantly enveloped in a smell so thick you could chew it. Dried lavender, old wine vinegar, something musky, and a strong hint of honey. Hanging from the rafters are bundles of herbs in various stages of withering. Marjoram wormwood, rosemary, sage, each labeled in faded ink or in some cases with a helpful drawing of a sad person and an arrow pointing to a body part. The nun in charge is Sister Petronilla. She wears thick spectacles, has suspiciously inky fingers, and a look of someone who absolutely will crush a beetle to make your salve. She smiles at you over a bubbling pot of what looks like green soup. "Ah," she says, the stomach dreamer, "come to see the cabinet." You assume this is a metaphor. It is not. She guides you to a towering wooden cupboard whose doors creak open to reveal dozens of tiny drawers. Each one bears a carved symbol: moons, stars, animals, a spoon, a goat, possibly a family joke. She pulls one open to show you a pile of dried mushrooms, for melancholy, she says. If taken with broth, another contains ground pearl, very expensive, only for bishops and severe toothaches. There are jars of preserved rose petals, bottles of fish oil, pouches of powdered bark, a dead lizard tied with ribbon. You nod respectfully and try not to breathe too deeply. Today your treatment is a cooling tonic intended to balance your inner heat and calm your digestive system. It includes violet syrup, mint honey, and something chalky that may have once been part of a castle wall. Sister Petronilla stirs it all in a bowl with a carved wooden spoon while humming a hymn about intestinal peace. She hands you a small clay cup. 3 sips. 1 for each humor you haven't upset yet. It tastes like sweetened dirt with a minty afterburn. You glance around the room and spot a large wooden pestle resting inside a stone mortar the size of a pumpkin. Nearby, a tray holds tiny glass bottles with handwritten labels like wound wine, lung balsam, and do not drink seriously. A small toad sits in a basket staring solemnly at a wall. "Is that part of the medicine?" you ask. Petronilla shrugs, jury's out. It turns out that medieval medicine, while steeped in religious ritual, also drew on an astonishing range of ingredients. Historians note that hospitals often had well-maintained herb gardens, and caregivers were trained formally or otherwise in the art of compounding remedies from natural sources. Treatments could be ingested, applied to the skin, or in one case, you hear about in hushed tones thrown at the illness. You are handed a small cloth sachet filled with crushed lavender camphor and a mystery ingredient that wards off sour breath and impure thoughts. You hang it from your cot and immediately sneeze. The medicine isn't all potions and teas. There are also plasters, sticky paste smeared on linen and applied to sore joints, and poultices, moist mash made of mustard seed or boiled onion slapped onto wounds with sincere intentions. There's even a treatment that involves wrapping the afflicted part in a cabbage leaf and whispering Psalm 42. You wonder who tested that and how they recorded the results. One patient near your bed insists he was cured of a persistent limp by wearing a necklace of dried garlic cloves and chanting Sanctus during storms. Another swears by nettle footbaths, though his feet are now green. No one questions it. Historians still debate whether these treatments had any real efficacy or if the power of belief did more of the healing than the herbs. There's growing evidence that many plants used had genuine antibacterial or anti-inflammatory properties. Honey, for example, was prized for wounds and ulcers, and vinegar was often used to clean tools or linen, though perhaps not thoroughly enough. Of course, not all remedies make sense. One day you overhear two nuns arguing over whether crushed emeralds or powdered antlers are better for curing fevers. Only if the emeralds are blessed, one insists. The other mutters about wasting good gemstones on people who can't even sit up. You begin to realize something. These treatments aren't random. They're woven into a broader philosophy, one where healing is about more than symptoms. Your fever is not just a hot forehead. It's a sign your body is out of harmony with the world. The treatment aims to restore that balance, whether through herbs, diet confession, or the occasional spoonful of snail paste. You're sent back to your cot with a small vial of something pale and sour. Sip it at dusk, Petronilla says, or give it to someone you dislike and see what happens. You thank her genuinely. The room has the strange, wonderful energy of someone who's doing everything she can with what little she has and doing it well. As night falls, the smell of the apothecary still clings to your sleeves, a blend of sage soot and something almost like hope. You settle into bed, sip your mystery tonic, and pull the lavender sachet close. Your stomach feels no different, but your spirit oddly lighter. The next few days drift by in a haze of routine broth prayers, poppy wine, and the slow, deliberate pace of a place that doesn't measure time in minutes, but in the number of coughs between bells. You're beginning to feel better physically anyway, but mentally you've started noticing just how strange your fellow patients really are. Take, for instance, the man in the cot to your right. He insists he's a minor noble who was cursed by a witch disguised as a goose. No one argues with him, mostly because he shares his dried apple slices. He's polite, overly fond of the phrase by St. Crispin's slipper, and once tried to charm a nun by comparing her to a spring turnip. It didn't work, but you respected the effort. Then there's the woman across the aisle who spends most of her day staring intently at the ceiling and muttering astrological calculations under her breath. She claims the alignment of Mars and Mercury has given her the ability to detect spoiled leaks with just a sniff. You watch her correctly guess the lunch stew was 3 days old. Respect. You begin to understand medieval medicine isn't just herbs and humors, it's also stars, signs, superstitions, and sometimes sheer performance. One afternoon, a young patient is brought in, trembling, sweating eyes, darting wildly. The nun beside him carries a parchment dotted with ink and small star symbols. His humors are off, she says, but so is his moon sign. She taps the scroll, frowns. Jupiter is not favorable today. We'll start with sage compresses and silence. And that's what they do. The boy is tucked into bed, given a sprig of rue to hold, and placed beside the southern wall, because Virgo rules the bowels. No one questions this logic. A novice reads to him from the Book of Hours in a whisper so soft it could put bricks to sleep. You ask Brother Thomas about it later. He shrugs. Sometimes the stars know more than we do, and even if they don't, it calms the patient. This sums up a good chunk of medieval healthcare. If it doesn't physically cure you, it's at least relaxing. There's something almost luxurious about being treated like your fever might be caused by a grumpy Saturn. One of the more peculiar therapies comes from an elderly nun named Sister Meliora, who believes in quieting the soul through quieting the mouth. Her method, silence. She claims that certain illnesses are worsened by loose tongues and overzealous chatter. Patients placed in her care are asked to refrain from speaking for entire days, allowed only to communicate through eyebrow raises, vigorous pointing, or, in one man's case, elaborate sneezing patterns. To your surprise, some of them actually improve. "I think I just needed a break," whispers a woman who spent 2 days in the silence corner. And some time tea. There's also the man who believes he's being haunted. Not in a spooky rattling chains way, but in a "there's a squirrel watching me from the rafters" and whispering Latin kind of way. He's given a balm made from foxglove and yarrow rubbed on his temples, while a monk sings a hymn in reverse. The squirrel does not leave, but he stops mentioning it during mealtimes, which is progress. Superstitions run deep here. One patient won't sleep unless his blanket is folded exactly 3 times and topped with a dried frog. Another refuses broth unless it's stirred counterclockwise. A third insists his cough is lessened if someone reads from the life of St. Anthony with their shoes off. Historians still argue whether these rituals were widespread or just the eccentricities of isolated patients. But in truth, they speak to something deeper, a need for meaning in suffering and for patterns in pain, even if the pattern involves owl feathers and moonlight. You begin to notice the staff accommodating these quirks. Sister Agnes rolls her eyes at the frog blanket, but makes sure it's folded just right. Brother Thomas tells the same saint story every night because the man in the corner says it helps him sleep. Sister Petronilla brews a special dreamless tea for the boy who fears night visions. No one knows what's in it, possibly moss. It's not about whether these cures make sense. It's about whether they help. And strangely they do. One morning, you find yourself quietly hanging your own dried herb sachet above your bed next to the candle niche. You arrange your blanket a bit more evenly. You catch yourself muttering a short phrase before each sip of broth. You don't believe it's magic, but it feels like care. And that's enough. As the candlelight flickers against the stone walls and the air hums with distant hymns and creaking cots, you realize healing in this place is a team effort. Whether you're fighting infection imbalance or imaginary squirrels, you're not doing it alone. You're beginning to feel like a regular, not necessarily healed, but used to the rhythm, the voices, the coughs you now recognize by pitch and location, which is how you end up doing something you never expected, wandering off, not far, just enough to satisfy the small flickering curiosity that's been growing ever since you spotted that locked wooden door near the edge of the herb garden. Today it's unlocked. You peek inside. The room is small, windowless, and dim, but unlike the ward, it hums with quiet urgency. Shelves line the walls, sagging under the weight of bottle scrolls and bundles of dried roots tied with string. This, you realize, is the apothecary's true heart, not the tidy herb cabinet you were shown, but the real workshop. And behind the table, sleeves rolled up to her elbows and brow furrowed in concentration, is Sister Petronilla. Again. She's stirring a thick paste that glows faintly yellow, muttering numbers under her breath. 2-1, unless it's plague season. Then add salt. She looks up and blinks as if you've stepped into a dream. Come to help, she asks, or just curious. You admit both. She grins, then you'd better not touch anything that hisses. The back rooms of the hospital, it turns out, are less about tranquility and more about experimentation. Here, away from the eyes of patients and benefactors, the real work happens. Tinctures are mixed, salves are boiled, strange powders weighed on scales made from brass and bone. One shelf contains preserved leeches. Another, labeled fungus trials, holds various jars filled with growing things that look like they might soon ask for voting rights. You find a wooden crate stuffed with dried orange peel next to a box of lizard tails. Not just any lizard, Petronilla explains without looking up. Desert ones, used for skin ailments and certain dreams. You nod as if this makes perfect sense. Hospitals in the Middle Ages were more than places of care. They were also centers of knowledge. Though formal medical schools were often attached to universities and distant cities, many hospitals, especially monastic ones, compiled their own books, kept records of recoveries, and experimented carefully with remedies passed down by word, herb, and trial. On the table lies an open manuscript. You lean over to read a line. Take crushed juniper, 2 parts wine, 1 part prayer. Mix with warm hand. Not every recipe includes the last step, Petronilla says, but I find it helps. Next to it is another entry. If the tongue is black, avoid cheese and moonlight. You squint. Does that work? Depends on the moon, she replies, utterly serious. The room also serves as storage. Baskets overflow with walnuts, acorns, goose grease, and beeswax. There are scrolls written in Latin Greek, and one in what might be scribbled panic. A corner is devoted entirely to pest control sprays of dried mint cracked clay bowls, filled with ash and strangely small bells. Rats hate bells, she claims. Or maybe they just like to dance. Historians still argue whether this behind-the-scenes herbal work was medicine folklore or alchemy. But it's clear that women like Petronilla weren't just compounding recipes. They were experimenting, adapting, and passing along knowledge as precious as any relic. Some hospitals even became early centers of public health, recording outbreaks and adjusting diets or isolation protocols based on observed patterns. You notice a tally scratched onto a beam. Boil patients this season, 23. Survived, 17. Worsened after leak compress, 3. Improved after nettle slap, 2. Unclear 1. Left with cart of pears. You ask if you can help. Petronilla points to a mortar filled with dried figs and a dash of powdered sulfur. Mash that into paste. It's for Sister Meliora's stubborn knee. And don't sniff it. You don't. As you work, she hums. Occasionally she recites something in Latin, probably a chant, possibly a warning. The room is warm, smoky, and filled with the sense of old, useful chaos. Everything here exists because someone thought it might help, and often it did. Evening falls and she hands you a cloth-wrapped bundle. Take this back to the ward. Lavender honey and a dash of peppermint for the boy with the broken voice. You thank her, and as you walk back through the stone hallway past flickering torches and the quiet rustle of habits moving through shadows, you feel something shift. You're not just a patient anymore. You've become part of the strange, stubborn mechanism that keeps this place turning. You slip the bundle under the boy's pillow and lie down in your own cot, your hand still smelling faintly of mint and fire. Outside, a bell rings. Inside the ward, sighs. And somewhere behind the chapel, a toad croaks once, then goes quiet. You wake up coughing, not the dramatic plaguey kind, more like a single dry bark from the back of your throat, a gentle reminder that hospital air is equal parts rosemary and damp dust. A cat sitting on your blanket gives you a judgmental glance, then promptly goes back to sleep. It's laundry day. You wouldn't think much of that at first, but medieval hospital laundry day is no small matter. It's a full-scale operation, part domestic ritual, part public hygiene effort, part theater. And it reveals something important. Cleanliness here is complicated. A novice hurries through the ward collecting linens in a cart that squeaks like a mouse choir. Your blanket is whisked away with impressive efficiency and replaced with one that smells of ash mint and something faintly eggy. You try not to ask. Meanwhile, out in the courtyard, a team of nuns is already at work. Buckets slosh. Soap made from lye and animal fat bubbles ominously. Sheets flap on lines strung between apple trees. A large pot of water boils above a fire that someone's been coaxing into life since dawn. One of the nuns is wearing what looks like a leather apron and a bandana. She's beating a stained tunic with a wooden paddle like it owes her money. Cleansing is holy work, she grunts, slapping a sleeve with rhythmic fury. Also good for the arms. You've heard whispers that some monastic hospitals bathe their patients weekly. Others only for feast days. It depends on the order, the region, the season, and whether or not the well is frozen over. Today, it seems you're in luck. A full partial wash is scheduled. You're led to a side chamber with a wooden bench, a bucket of lukewarm water, and a rag that probably began life as a curtain. A nun, mercifully cheerful, hands you a small bar of herbal soap and closes the door. Medieval bathing isn't exactly spa day. There's no lavender steam or gentle music. The water is minimal privacy, scarce, and the entire affair takes under 5 minutes. Still, the soap smells like pine and thyme, and when you emerge wrapped in a towel that used to be a tablecloth, you feel almost human again. Back in the ward, a different kind of cleaning is underway. A novice walks between beds, swinging a censer, trailing curls of frankincense and myrrh. It smells holy, yes, but also like they're trying to disguise something less holy. You suspect it's yesterday's turnip stew, which has a persistence modern science could study. Then comes the sweeping. Floors are scrubbed with bundles of herbs, tied together, broom thyme, rosemary. Sometimes a few sprigs of rue for ill-tempered spirits. The effect is subtle but effective. A mild earthy scent wafts through the hall, replacing the stale air with something fresh, almost forest-like. You overhear Sister Agnes instructing a novice on the sacred order of sanitation. Start with the altar, she says, pointing toward the chapel entrance. Then the ward, then the privies, never in reverse. This order, you learn, is deliberate. The logic, holiness moves outward like ripples in a pond. If you clean the chamber pots and then the altar, you risk drawing spiritual muck into sacred space. Whether that's symbolic or actual policy, you're not sure, but you're not about to test it. The privies, by the way, are functional. A row of wooden seats over a pit with modest curtains and a very suspicious-looking bucket of ashes. A small painting of a saint hangs above one of the stalls, presumably for comfort or divine distraction. One patient claims the image winked at him. You chalk it up to strong broth. Despite the limits of medieval plumbing, there's a surprising attention to hygiene here. Water is drawn fresh each day. Hands are rinsed before meals. Surgical tools are boiled sometimes even twice. Bed linens are changed weekly unless soiled sooner, and certain herbs are placed in mattresses to repel lice. Still, the standard fluctuates. One ward you hear only washes blankets once a season. Another claims their water is blessed pure and thus needs no filtering. A few patients believe cleanliness weakens the body's natural defenses. One man proudly refuses to bathe, insisting that saints never needed soap. He also has fleas. Historians still debate the realities of medieval cleanliness. The stereotype is one of dirt and disease, but in truth, many hospitals held to strict codes of hygiene, especially those run by monastic orders. The Rule of St. Benedict, for example, includes instructions for bathing the sick and washing their clothes. Some hospitals even built rudimentary bathhouses, hot rooms, fueled by wood fires, where patients could sweat, scrub, and sip herbal teas. Others relied on dry rubs, vinegar rinses, or simply changing the patient's sheets and declaring them ceremonially refreshed. Today, you're ceremonially refreshed twice. First, with a new tunic that fits marginally better than your old one, and second, when a nun wipes your brow with a damp cloth that smells like sage and goodwill. She smiles, adjusts your pillow, and hums a tune that may or may not be about nettles. As dusk falls, the ward is quieter than usual. Clean linens, clean floors, clean air. The candlelight flickers gently, casting long shadows across freshly folded blankets and polished floor tiles. Someone has placed a small bouquet of herbs, mint, lavender, and yarrow beside your bed. The effect is oddly luxurious. For the first time in days, the hospital doesn't smell like cabbage. And you drift to sleep in a bed that smells of pine and possibility. It's easy to forget in a place run by robed men and quiet-footed novices that women hold an immense amount of power here. Not loud power, not the kind that rattles goblets and issues decrees, but a deeper, steadier current that runs beneath the stone floors and through every folded blanket and whispered prayer. It starts, of course, with the nuns. You've met Sister Agnes, who could silence a thunderstorm with a look. But as the days pass, you begin to notice the quiet authority of other sisters. Sister Isolde, who measures out herbal doses with the precision of a royal mint. Sister Ghislaine, who never raises her voice, yet somehow keeps 3 wards and a leper house running on time. And Sister Bertille, who seems to have a gift for knowing which patients need prayers and which just need a hug and some extra bread. They're not just nurses. They're chemists, counselors, record keepers, administrators, spiritual guides, and when needed, enforcers. Today you're visited by a new face, a woman named Alex. She wears no habit. Her cloak is frayed, her hands stained with soil. and she walks like someone who spent her life outdoors. She's introduced as a wise woman allowed into the hospital on special invitation, which is monastic code. For we don't understand how she knows what she knows, but it works, so we let her in. Alex isn't part of the religious order, but she's known to the sisters. She speaks with a soft accent and a way of holding your wrist that makes you feel like she's listening to your bones. She presses 2 fingers to your temple, asks how your dreams have been, and sniffs the air near your collarbone like a wary cat. Still too warm, she mutters. More time, less onion, and sleep on your left side. You obey without question. Wise women like Alex straddle the line between healer and outcast. In towns and villages, they might be midwives, herbalists, or unofficial surgeons. Some are revered, others are distrusted. In a hospital like this, their presence is tolerated, especially when their cures work faster than a 3-day prayer vigil. Later, you see her conferring with Sister Petronilla over a batch of poultice ingredients. Their discussion is part Latin, part French, and part vigorous pointing. You understand none of it, but the energy feels collaborative, like 2 artists debating the right shade of green. Then there are the patients. The women's ward is quieter, though no less chaotic. You're granted a brief glimpse when the curtain is pulled back for laundry hour. Inside, patients knit gossip doughs, and according to one novice, occasionally cast spells on their bedpans to make them less unpleasant. One woman, Agatha, is recovering from a long fever. She wears a crown of woven rosemary and recites poetry from memory. Another, deeply pregnant, sharpens a wooden spoon against her bedpost, just in case the baby comes out arguing. You find yourself deeply comforted by both. Women in the hospital take on multiple roles at once. Nuns tend the sick, manage inventories, copy medical texts by candlelight, and treat illnesses with a calm that borders on supernatural. Lay women, some widows, some tradespeople, donate thyme blankets and dried pears. They sweep cook-sing hymns and hold trembling hands during nighttime fevers. Historians still argue how much autonomy these women had. Official records emphasize obedience and hierarchy, but surviving letters and journals suggest a different story, one where women acted independently, developed their own treatment protocols, and occasionally overruled male staff when necessary. You see a hint of that today when Sister Ghislaine quietly redirects Brother Tomas away from a patient's bedside. He needs quiet, she says gently. Tomas starts to argue, then thinks better of it. She smiles. The patient sleeps peacefully for the first time in days. Then there are the midwives. Though technically separate from hospital staff, they're often summoned when a birth is imminent. Today, one arrives. Her name is Maud, and she walks like she's personally birthed half the village. She carries a pouch filled with herbs, string a wooden spoon, and a cloth she calls her birthing banner. She examines the pregnant patient with a look of complete disinterest in anyone else's opinion. She's fine, Maud says. Baby's stubborn, like his father probably. No one questions her, not even Hugo the barber surgeon, who arrives half an hour later and leaves after saying nothing useful. It's not just healing that women handle. Here, it's continuity, life, the fragile tether that holds community together. They sing to patients with no family. They place coins in the hands of the dead. They remember who likes their broth thin and who needs an extra spoonful of honey when the coughing returns. One evening, you find Sister Agnes sitting beside a patient who hasn't woken in days. She isn't praying. She's telling a story, soft, rhythmic, probably made up on the spot, about a rooster who fell in love with the moon. The patient stirs, smiles. No miracle, just connection. You begin to understand healing. Here is not just about the body. It's about being seen, being remembered, being included in the rhythm of a place that, against all odds, keeps turning. As the candles burn low and the ward drifts into half sleep, you listen to the soft shuffling of skirts and slippers, the rustle of habits, the whisper of women doing their work in the quiet spaces where no one else looks. And you feel something you didn't know you'd missed, mothered. It begins with a cough, a wet, rattling, unmistakable cough from somewhere near the far end of the ward. You pause mid-bite of your evening barley mash. Others glance up too, spoons hovering. No one speaks, but something subtle shifts in the air like a thread pulled taut. The sound comes again, then another. By morning, 3 more patients are coughing. The nuns begin to move differently. Not frantic, never frantic, but brisker, more deliberate. The incense burned at matins is stronger, more acrid. One nun opens every window, letting in sharp winter air. To stir the humors, she says, but you know it's more than that. Something is coming, or rather, it has arrived. You're familiar now with the rhythms of the hospital, the prayers, the herbs, the measured pace of recovery. But pestilence throws everything into disarray, not all at once. It creeps. A novice begins sneezing during morning rounds and is quietly relocated to a cot in the corner. A bucket of vinegar is placed outside the chapel. You're given a sprig of rosemary and told to keep it tucked into your collar as a charm. Whether the charm is symbolic or scientific isn't entirely clear. Probably both. By midday, 4 beds have been moved apart. Curtains are drawn. A strange quiet takes hold the hush of people trying not to admit they're scared. Just a passing fever, someone whispers. The seasons shift, nothing more. But everyone knows illnesses come and go, but sometimes they linger, sometimes they spread. You overhear Sister Agnes instructing the novices in what sounds suspiciously like emergency planning. Start with the weakest, she says, then isolate the fresh arrivals. The rest we pray through. A second bell is rung after lunch, one not on the usual schedule. A prayer for intercession. It draws everyone to the chapel, where the chanting is louder, more urgent. Candles are lit not just for the sick, but for protection. The hospital isn't panicking, it's adapting. Monastic hospitals like this were often the front line against outbreaks, caring for the ill when others would flee. Sometimes they were overwhelmed. Other times they became sanctuaries, their closed walls and strict routines offering a kind of quarantine before the word even existed. You ask Brother Thomas what's happening. Nothing, he says too quickly. Then, after a pause, something. We're not sure yet, but the leeches are ready. You decide not to ask what that means. That night a new patient is brought in. Pale, shivering, his lips darkened. The nuns act quickly, rubbing his limbs with hot cloths, pressing herbal steam to his chest. The other patients pretend not to watch. but everyone is watching. The next morning, his bed is empty. No one explains, no one needs to. Pestilence in the medieval world is a known terror. Everyone has heard the stories: plague carts, bell-wearing watchers, towns emptied in a week. The hospital has records. Sister Petronilla tells you, scrolls filled with observations, symptoms, mortality rates, remedies that failed, others that gave hope. She shows you a page, her finger tracing an entry. When the breath rattles and the skin darkens, apply warmed oil and sing the psalm of mercy until the voice fails. She doesn't smile. Herbal mixtures are brewed by the gallon. Rue sage wormwood. The air smells like scorched fields and wet bark. Beds are rotated daily. Everyone is encouraged to speak less, pray more, eat lightly. The sick are tended to gently and without pause. No one is turned away. But even you, recovering from whatever affliction brought you here, are watched more closely. A nun touches your wrist and frowns just slightly before moving on. There's no panic, but there is preparation and prayer. So much prayer. One evening, you see Sister Meliora kneeling beside a fevered woman's bed, whispering a prayer in Latin, her hand resting on the patient's chest. She stays there for over an hour. When she finally stands, she leaves a single violet flower on the pillow. By now, half the ward is quieter than usual. No more dice games, no rants about moon signs, just the soft shuffle of slippers, the occasional cough, and the ever-present sound of chanting. Historians still argue whether medieval hospitals helped slow disease or simply spread it more efficiently. Records vary, but what's clear is this: the people who worked in them, nuns, monks, lay women, novices, rarely fled. They stayed. They risked their lives for patients who weren't family, weren't noble, weren't known. One night you're woken by candlelight and the scent of vinegar. A nun is placing soaked cloths along the windowsill. It draws the sickness away, she says softly. Or maybe it just makes us feel better. You don't argue. By morning, the fever seems to have slowed. The worst of it perhaps has passed. Or perhaps you're just in the lull between waves. Still, there's a new calm to the ward. Not the restful kind, the resigned kind. Everyone has seen something ancient brush its fingers through the air. You lie back in your cot. Your own fever is gone, but your dreams are still odd, filled with floating herbs and bells ringing out across empty streets. And yet, you feel safe. Not from sickness, but from loneliness. Here, even in the shadow of pestilence, no one is left alone. Hands are held, names are whispered, songs are sung, and that somehow feels like a kind of cure. You wake to warmth on your cheek. Sunlight, for the first time in days, slants through the high windows, touching the edge of your blanket with soft gold. The ward smells faintly of thyme and baked apples. Someone's replaced the wilted herbs near your cot with a fresh bundle lavender lemon balm, maybe a sprig of mint. You stretch slowly, gingerly, and realize something astonishing: you don't ache. Your head is clear. Your stomach isn't staging a rebellion. Your legs feel less like pickled wood. The fevered fuzz that clung to your mind has begun to lift. You sit up without groaning. Around you, the ward is stirring with cautious energy. Beds are being fluffed. Bread is being sliced. Someone is humming a hymn that's vaguely off-key but oddly comforting. The sense of dread from the past week has thinned, softened. There are still coughs, yes, but no more of the hollow kind. You've turned a corner, and so has the hospital. After morning prayer, Brother Thomas stops by with his usual clanking tray of tinctures and mild chaos. He eyes you thoughtfully, then taps your forehead. Cool, he says with a smile. Miraculous. Sister Agnes arrives a few minutes later. She gives you the same inspection, though hers includes lifting your blanket with a precision snap and sniffing you like a suspicious mother. Much improved, she declares. You'll be discharged tomorrow. Tomorrow, you blink. It's not that you're ungrateful. It's just this place has become normal, familiar. The cots, the creaking floorboards, the broth rotations, the sound of Sister Meliora's lullabies drifting through the ward, the cats, even Hugo's overconfident swagger. You've learned to sleep through the bells and wake to the smell of boiled garlic. You've grown used to sharing your space with strangers who mutter prayers in their sleep and argue over whether St. Bridget or St. Sebastian is more efficient in matters of chest complaints. Still, the day moves forward. You're given a warm compress to help draw out any lingering demons and a celebratory cup of watered wine with your midday pottage. One of the other patients, Agatha the rosemary poet, waves at you with a spoon. You'll miss it here, she says, not unkindly. We always do. In the afternoon, you're led to the scriptorium. Sister Ghislaine hands you a stylus and a sheet of parchment. Write your name and anything you've learned. You hesitate, then scrawl your name crookedly across the top. Below it, in smaller letters, broth is underrated. Blankets matter. Saints are patient. She nods pleased. Your final examination is oddly musical. A novice plays a short psalm on a dulcimer while a nun rubs camphor oil on your hands. It's meant to restore the balance of sound and spirit. You aren't sure if you believe it, but your joints feel warm and your mood floats. By evening, a small procession of caregivers visits your bedside. Not all at once, just drifting in one by one. Sister Petronilla gives you a jar of thick green balm for the road. Hugo pats your shoulder and tells you solemnly that he only considered bloodletting once. You're not sure if that's a compliment. Finally, Sister Agnes returns with your discharge blessing. She places her hand on your head and murmurs words too soft to catch. Then she presses something small into your palm, a little wooden token. The turnip, your original admission marker. Return it, she says gently, to the world, or to someone else who needs it. You nod speechless. As dusk folds its arms around the building and the first Vespers bell rings out, you sit at the edge of your cot, clean-robed, fed, and no longer feverish. You watch the candlelight flicker on stone walls, listen to the gentle rustle of habits and sandals, and realize how long it's been since you last felt this well, this safe. No one rushes you. No one forces you out the door. You'll leave tomorrow after all. Tonight is for sleeping, for easing out of illness like slowly shedding a second skin. You lie down, tuck the turnip token beneath your blanket, and listen to the ward settle into its old familiar rhythm. Snoring, whispered prayers, cats thumping softly across the rafters. Tomorrow you return to the world. But tonight you're still here, still held, still healing. Wind down 300 words. The candlelight grows softer now, melting down into sleepy pools on the stone floor. The voices quiet. Even the bells seem to pause between chimes. You rest cocooned in wool and lavender, your breathing slow, the air still warm with the scent of mint and hearth smoke. Outside the wind hums low through the cloister garden, brushing over bundled herbs and flapping laundry, familiar rhythms, safe sounds. Your thoughts drift like leaves in a stream, gentle, unhurried. You remember the taste of broth, the whisper of prayers in the dark, the firm but kind hand of Sister Agnes adjusting your blanket just so, the echo of chanting, the feel of sunlight through the high window. Nothing needs to happen now. No more bandages to change, no more tonics to sip. The hospital breathes around you, a gentle living place, stitched together with patience, ritual, and quiet care. You are whole enough to sleep, and so you let go of the aches, of the fears, of the strange goat dreams and the vinegar cloths. You drift deeper through warmth and memory, through the hush of candlelight and distant bells. Here, in this soft, sacred stillness, you are safe, you are seen, and slowly, gently, you sleep. Sweet dreams.